In one corner, we have Waymo. In the other corner, we have Uber and Lyft. This is a big battle that is continuing to get more heated in terms of the ride-sharing wars, where you have self-driving cars on one end and human drivers on the other end. And so in this video, I'm talking about the three big differentiating factors in this massive ride-sharing war. Number one, safety. Now, I know this is an interesting place to start, but safety is a unique one that's becoming more popular and more of a talking point, especially when you look at Waymo. This is a report that came out in September of 2024, and you can see that in their first 22 million miles, there were 84% fewer airbag deployment crashes, 73% fewer injury-causing crashes, and 48% fewer police-reported crashes compared to a human driving the same distance in the cities where we operate. And I know a bit of an odd place to start on this video, or maybe not, depending on how you look at it, but this is a big topic of conversation, right? I think in the beginning, when you look at self-driving cars, take like Teslas, which were more drivable cars with a self-driving feature, if I'd call it that, there were a lot of reports. And a lot of these reports went viral of like, oh, this self-driving car by accident drove straight into a pond, or this self-driving car directly drove into an accident or something like that. And these kind of got headlining news stories. I'm going to be honest, I think they were a little bit clickbaity, if I had to be very blunt, being like, oh, well, as you can imagine, a news story about a self-driving car driving perfectly isn't going to get the same attention as a self-driving car screwing up. And what's interesting is over the years, there's been a lot of reports of showing how powerful and better self-driving cars are, and especially the technology behind them. I remember there's one story where a guy tried to sue, I think it was Tesla, because he got into an accident and it was self-driving and he broke his arm, right? So he tried to sue Tesla. But then in the meta-analysis, they found that if it wasn't Tesla doing all these crazy, smart, intricate moves, he probably would have died if he was the one driving the car. And this is something you're seeing a lot more when it comes to self-driving cars and the arguments behind them. And I hate to say it, I kind of see it, that the evidence, the numbers don't lie. That self-driving cars, although they're not perfect, and don't get me wrong, they definitely have their flaws, do not get me wrong, at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie that self-driving cars are starting to become, and now are, way safer than human drivers. And I think safety is a big thing. Now, granted, I don't think, at least right now, a lot of people are saying, hey, I was going to get an Uber to go to the bar or to the nightclub or to work. I was going to get Uber, but now I'm getting Waymo to be safer. I don't think we're there yet, but I wouldn't be surprised in years down the road if now it almost becomes the opposite, where we say, wait, you're getting an Uber? You're going to trust a human to drive? I know very almost dystopian or maybe utopian, depending on how you look at it. I know a very Black Mirror style thinking, but it is true. It's the same thing, I guarantee, when like the calculator first came out. And someone's like, wait a minute, you're going to do math by hand when you could screw up, you could have more mistakes? Just use the calculator. It takes 2 seconds and it does the work for you. And I think that is something that Waymo, because they're starting to show all this data of how safer it is, taking a Waymo, getting in that car, having a self-driving vehicle that has the technology and the features, and not trusting a human driver, it seems to be, although again, an odd place to start for this video, it seems to be that self-driving technology is becoming increasingly more safe. Where years down the road, who knows where we're going to, I guess, pun intended, years down the road, who knows where we're going to end up. But I think that's one interesting talking point that's undeniable when you look at Waymo versus the human drivers of Uber and Lyft. Number 2, functionality. This is definitely going to be the biggest one on this video because while there are some similarities, of course, between Waymo and Uber and Lyft, there are a tremendous amount of differences. And I think these differences could potentially, until I get to the next point, be a big make or break when it comes to how things are going to evolve in the ride-sharing market. Now, first off, let's talk about the app. I've done videos about how to use the Uber app, how to use the Lyft app, and how to use the Waymo app. In general, for the most part, they're pretty much the same when it comes to ordering the ride. But that's where things change a lot. Yes, both apps, you order a car, it comes to you. Technically, we'll talk about that in a second. It comes to you, picks you up, drops you off. So the overall idea of Waymo versus Uber and Lyft, kind of similar on that front. But in terms of the nitty gritty, it gets very, very interesting. Very interesting, very different, and very kind of technical. Now, first off, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, it's very easy, let's say, as the car's pulling up, to call your driver and say, hey, I'm actually at this one corner. Or, hey, I noticed you stopped at this one corner. Do you mind pulling around the other corner? That's where I am. Like, say, for whatever reason, you don't want to walk or you can't walk. Like, say, just for whatever reason, you're like, hey, can you pull around? The Uber driver and Lyft driver can do that. With Waymo, it's a bit more tricky. Another thing is unlocking the car, if I put that in quotation marks. Because with Uber and Lyft, you walk up to the car, you open it. The driver says, hey, I'm Mike, nice to meet you. Hey, I'm Amanda, nice to meet you. That's it. With Waymo, it's kind of weird. Like, the first time I ever got in a Waymo, it actually confused me a little bit. Like, it's not hard, but the car kind of pulls up. You have to let the app know, like, hey, I'm here. Then the car kind of stops. It almost drove away without me the first time I got in the Waymo because it's kind of being weird. It stops. Then you click another button almost to kind of like unlock the car. You get in it, and then you say, okay, now it's time to go. So with Waymo, at least the initial starting steps of the ride, one, it isn't really that customizable. It comes right to that location, so you have to be kind of prepared for that. That, like, say, if it pulls around the corner or across the street, you kind of have to deal with that. The next thing is unlocking the car. It's kind of annoying, I think, if anything, more with Waymo than when I've taken Ubers and Lyfts, just given, again, the nature of the car having to almost control it to stop it, unlock it, get in, start the ride, etc. Now, in terms of the ride itself, right, with Waymo, you have features like listening to music, all that kind of stuff, adjusting the temperature. Same thing with Uber and Lyft. So those elements are the same. But the big one, as you can imagine, is the self-driving aspect. The fact that with a Waymo, you don't have a driver. You can still maximum fit 4 people. You're not allowed to have somebody in the driver's seat itself. Who knows if that will change. But for right now, you can have maximum 4 people, very similar to an Uber and Lyft. And on that note, keep in mind that right now, at least at the exact time of this video, there are no premium features with Waymo. There are no premium features. So it's not like you can order a Waymo XL. Like, say if you have 5 or 6 people with you, you can easily get an Uber XL or Lyft XL. With Waymo, if you really want to take a Waymo, you'd have to order 2. That is also another factor to consider, that, like, say if you have a group with you, and most people do, like, say when going out, the whole Waymo XL doesn't exist yet. That might change. I would not be surprised if, like, say they unveiled that. Or, like, say if you want to roll up in style in terms of like an Uber Lux, Uber Black, Lyft Black, whatever, Waymo is just always going to be Waymo, at least for right now, for the foreseeable future. Again, we'll see what happens as time goes on. That's another factor. Now, in terms of the drive, though, with the self-driving aspect, there is no driver, like I said. Now, to some people, this could be both a pro and a con, depending on how you look at it. For some people, and I'm not even saying most, it's tough for me to give like an exact statistic, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe 3 out of 4, maybe 5 out of 6 people prefer no driver. That they get in the car, they're like, hey, I just want to go from point A to point B. I get in the car, I'm just going to play on my phone, as most people do, or like say you're on a phone call, and you don't have to worry about the formality of talking to a human. Now, some people might like that, some people might not. There are some times, I'll be honest, and I'd say most of the time, if I had to be blunt, I get in Uber or Lyft, and I'm just on my phone, not really in the mood to have a conversation. There are other times where I actually want to have a conversation. What is kind of nice to just talk with somebody, have a human-to-human face conversation. And I do think there is an aspect to that, right? I do think there is an aspect to that human connection. This does depend upon the person and maybe even on your mood, right? That when it comes to ordering a Waymo, sometimes you're like, hey, you know what? I don't feel like talking to somebody, but like say it's one of those other nights where you're like, hey, you know what? I do feel like talking to somebody. I'm in the mood to have a conversation. I don't just want to sit by myself. I don't want to just scroll on my phone. I'm definitely going to order an Uber Lyft to have that human connection. But I think that's one thing that I got to give Waymo credit for, in addition to safety, is the fact that this is not a human driver. I think a lot of people do like that. They don't have to have that human conversation. For better or for worse, you could argue it either way. I think some people, and a lot of people actually, and I think most people would prefer that. And on top of that note, as you can imagine, when it comes to Waymo, things are being recorded. That's another thing as well. Now, when it comes to Ubers and Lyfts, it is more common now than ever that Uber and Lyft drivers have a dash cam that films the outside of their vehicle and the inside, also records not only video, but sound or audio as well. I think it's way more common now. And I say to all my rideshare drivers out there, make sure you have a dash cam. Just get it. You can get one on Amazon pretty cheap for even like $80 or $100. They're way cheaper now than they ever used to be. just get one in case something goes wrong, in case you get into an accident. For all my rideshare drivers out there, just have a dash cam. Now, what's interesting about Waymo is a bit different. With Waymo, in terms of the functionality of the drive, the cameras work. So the staff of Waymo can see what you're doing, but they can't hear you. The only instance that they can hear you is in an emergency. So let's say something horrific or something bad really happens, and you call 911. You're like, hey, this is like an emergency. It's a legit emergency. They can turn the audio on. So that capability is there, but for the most part, they monitor you via video. So you are being monitored, right? I remember I read a Reddit post of someone talking about how they fit 5 people in the Waymo, and like I said, 4 people maximum. Waymo XL does not exist yet. It drove for like 3 minutes, the car pulled over, and they got an alert saying, hey, we just saw that you have 5 people in the car. We just saw that on the video. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cancel the ride and pull over right now. Remember, 4 people maximum. Now, with an Uber Lyft, as much as I might not like to admit this, or maybe, again, depending on how you look at it, it is pretty common. Let's say if you have 5 people with you, you order an Uber, the Uber pulls up and you're like, hey man, can we just squeeze one person in the back? I remember as a former driver, that would happen all the time. It would happen all the time where someone would be like, please man, just one more person in the back. I'm like, look, just order an Uber XL. Like there's a cop right there. This is illegal, right? With Waymo, they would definitely pull over and everything. But again, that is that human interaction. That is another part of Uber and Lyft that some people might like that human interaction. Other people might not. To use another example, when I was a former driver, I remember this when I first started driving, and back in the day, Uber and Lyft was big. I mean, like, hey, you gotta have a good conversation, be a positive driver, et cetera, et cetera. And a guy got my cars like in the morning, and I was like, hey, how's your day going so far? And he's like, good. And he went to his phone, and I'm like, oh, so cool. So how's work? And I tried to keep the conversation going. And the guy said, hey, man, I'm gonna give you a 5-star rating. Don't worry. I'm not gonna lie though, just to be blunt, not to be rude, I don't really want to have a conversation right now. I just want to play my phone and relax and get ready for work. I'm kind of stressed. Don't worry, I'm giving you 5 stars no matter what, right? That's another example of this human interaction when it comes to just Uber and Lyft versus Waymo. A big, big, big thing to consider. Human interaction and, of course, all logistics of them driving. Now, in terms of getting dropped off, this is another really interesting one, because in terms of getting dropped off, Waymo's very different than Uber and Lyft. With Uber and Lyft, you could say, hey, do you mind pulling up on this corner? You can direct the driver where to go. With Waymo, you're kind of at the mercy to the Waymo. Now, I will say, I did do a video about all the kind of hacks and tricks you can do in the Waymo app. I'll post it in the description if you want to watch it. Basically, how to use the Waymo app. One feature is you could say, hey, try to minimize the walking time. And you may be wondering, like, wait, what do you mean by minimize the walking time? What's interesting about Waymo, and I think this is because self-driving technology is still very, very new, right? It's still very, very new. For the most part, when you order a Waymo now, what will happen is the Waymo will drop you off kind of close to your place. Now, I'm not saying you're gonna have to I'm not saying you're gonna have to walk a mile away or a half mile away. It's usually, I find, like, they drop you off like here, and the place like around the corner. I remember the first time I ordered a Waymo, I went to Juneshine, great hard kombucha bar here in LA, and it's on Main Street. Pretty busy street here in LA. So it dropped me off at the corner on like a very quiet residential street, and I had to walk maybe a block to get to Juneshine. No big deal, but keep in mind that can be an issue for some people. If you're like, wait, with Uber and Lyft, I get dropped off right in front of the venue or the place or whatever. I don't want to walk, or I can't walk, or whatever the case is. With Waymo, it kind of says, hey, we're going to drop you off here. Sorry, we're not going to get any closer because to be as safe as possible, given the still newness, if that's the word, of self-driving technology, we're going to drop you off right here. And for a lot of people, I can see that being very annoying. And last, but definitely not least, number 3 is the price. The almighty dollar for a lot of people is the biggest thing, right? How much does it cost? For most people right now, in this day and age, when they order a rideshare, they go to Uber, is it cheaper? Or they memorize the price. Then they go to Lyft. Which one's cheaper? They order that ride. And here's what's kind of crazy. I might say, was it 2 or 3 months ago, Waymo, when I first got invited to it, was always more expensive than Uber and Lyft. I never checked Waymo. I ordered it a couple times because I wanted to try it out. I will say, being in a Waymo, which maybe is another point to bring up for the last point on functionality, is kind of trippy. I'm kind of used to it now, but the first time you take and order a Waymo, it is kind of weird. Like the steering wheel moves on its own. Like it stops and goes, like it can understand people. Like there's one point, I remember I pulled up and some guy like was crossing the street and then stopped and like waved the Waymo. And as he started to wave, the Waymo went. So like the Waymo almost seemed like it could understand human gestures of what to do. So kind of trippy, right? But typically, I only ordered it once to try it out, and a second time because one of my friends wanted to try it out as well. She was kind of curious, right? And it is still so new. It's kind of fun and exciting, right? It's like a new thing that's being brought into our society. That being said, over the past even just few months, which isn't that long of a time if you really think about it, I've noticed Waymos have gotten significantly more cheaper to the point where now, and who knows if this will be even crazier as time goes on, maybe even near the end of this year or beginning of next year, that Waymo's now starting to become cheaper than Uber and Lyft. Now, and I'm not just saying this, when I go to order a ride, before, it was just Uber and Lyft. I check them, whichever one's cheapest, I'm going to order that because, it's whatever. Uber and Lyft's pretty much the same thing. But now, because Waymo's getting so much cheaper, and has been the case where I'm like, wait a minute, Uber's actually cheap, or Waymo's actually cheaper than both Uber and Lyft. Or Waymo is cheaper than Lyft, but more expensive than Uber or whatever. It's fluctuating. So I'm at the point now that when I go to order a ride, I pull up Uber and Lyft and Waymo and see whichever one's cheapest. Now, there are some limitations with Waymo. I've talked about them in other videos. Like right now, it's only in select different cities. In addition, even here in LA, it's a pretty big area of where you can go, but it is limited too. You have to be able to be picked up and dropped off in the same exact area. If you go outside that area, it's going to stop you from doing the ride. So for example, if let's say I want to go from where I am right now, let's say Marina del Rey to Playa del Rey, at least at the time of this video, the map doesn't extend to Playa, so I couldn't do that. Even though I can be picked up here, I can't be dropped off there. So there are limitations, and in that case, when it comes to the price, it doesn't really matter the price. I'm going to order an Uber or Lyft. But as time goes on, this I think might be for most people the biggest differentiating factor. For a lot of people, they're like, okay, safety, yeah, it's important, but not the first thing you typically think about, although it's important to mention on this video. Functionality. Well, having a driver or not, being able to actually easily access the car or not, maybe you have to walk a little bit after it drops you off. Okay, that's whatever. Not too much different, honestly, than Uber and Lyft. Yeah, it's kind of trippy not having a human driver, but who cares? But the third one, the price, I think is almost 90% of this video of what most people care about is the price. How much cheaper, or is it cheaper, taking Waymo? Back in the day, it was, I'm going to say 100%, always more expensive. Now, though, not as much. And then one big factor, which I know is a very hot topic right now for a lot of different reasons, is tips. I mean, tipping culture, we can all agree, has gotten out of hand. And I've said before in a lot of other videos, and I think rideshare drivers and ridesharing in general is the most left out industry when it comes to tipping, right? For every other industry you tip, and you can tip a lot, right? Bartenders, you tip your massage therapists, you tip your hairdressers, you tip your waiters and waitresses, of course. Tipping's important. And I feel like out of any industry, even if you look at delivery or whatchamacallit, food delivery, like DoorDash, Grubhub, Uber Eats, etc., you always tip your delivery driver. Rideshare driving, I think the rideshare drivers, get the least amount of tips when they should be deserve the tips. You even tip your taxi driver, right? That being said, you don't tip your Waymo. So even if, say, typically 20% is kind of standard. If, say, I'm getting a ride for, I'm making this up, say it's $20 for Waymo, and say $19 for an Uber. Well, the Waymo's more expensive. But typically we tip 20%. So on that Uber, I would tip, say, 20% of $19 is $3.80. Let's round that to $4. I actually would have my ride total be $23. 19 plus a $4 tip is $23. With Waymo, though, it's just that flat 20. I'm not worried or have to think about that tip. So even if, say, Waymo is going to be a bit more expensive, when you factor in tipping, it is still going to be way cheaper than that as well. And so I think that's where things get way more interesting. When it comes to this video, I want to finish it off with this last point about the price, because it is crazy in the last 3 months since I started taking Waymos and been looking at the app. I've been studying the analytics. I've been reading articles like I typically do for all these videos. The price has gone down substantially, especially compared to Uber and Lyft. And I think for a lot of people, as time continues to go on, even in the next 3 or 4 months, I wouldn't be surprised if Waymo almost consistently starts to be cheaper than Uber and Lyft and almost any other ride-sharing app. Because there are other ones that do exist. Like Empower is another one. I know Rides is another one. There are other ride-sharing apps, but they're usually location-specific. Uber and Lyft is pretty much everywhere, right? I mean, Lyft is only in the United States and Canada. Uber is worldwide. But even still, with Waymo getting cheaper and cheaper, almost by the day it seems, that to me, when you look at the big rideshare battle, the big battle of Waymo versus Uber and Lyft, the biggest thing for most people is in the safety, the functionality, or whatever. If they can get there, they can get there. The biggest thing is the price. And Waymo is getting way cheaper.